Giving a toast at a wedding is common. What's the worst thing you've heard someone say while they were giving one? This is the story of a toast spiraling out of control. A couple in their early 60s got married in Houston, Texas. Drinks were served prior to dinner. At dinner, the now wife's cousin rose, somewhat unsteadily, took the microphone and began her toast to the newlyweds. I remember it started fine and I wasn't really paying attention because I barely knew anyone involved. Just platitudes about the happy couple. My ears perked up, and I started to greatly enjoy the wedding. When she started talking about Jesus. So much Jesus. And so suddenly. One minute it was, I love my cousin and she looks so happy. The next was, praise Jesus and only he can protect the divine institution of marriage, for it is to him that we give our hearts. And it is Jesus to whom we hold most dear, and to Jesus that we must repent our sins, etc., etc. Meanwhile, one or more of her relatives, who clearly had enough of her, were trying to politely and unobtrusively get within snatching distance of the microphone. But Jesus did indeed have the cousin's back that day, and she was able to weave and dodge, all while increasing the volume of her prayers to a Jesus that she clearly considered to both be all-powerful and deaf. It was magnificent, and it was the groom who eventually was able to gently coax the microphone out of the cousin's hands, and she triumphantly went back to her table where she spent the rest of the night getting sozzled and cheap drinks. All in all, 14 out of 10 as far as weddings go. Trying to snatch the mic from a cousin in a Jesus role? Good luck with that. She was dancing with the divine. No one could stop her. Story 2. There was a post in one of the advice hubs from a woman asking if she was wrong for leaving her sister's wedding. Since then, she has a lot of trauma to deal with. But therapy was helping and she was finally getting her life back together. During her sister's wedding, the maid of honor, sister's best friend, gave a speech, talking about how it was a total mess up, but she finally did one thing right in helping with the wedding. She was so upset at the reference to her previous mess-ups and trauma she left. Her sister stopped her outside the venue and defended her friend, saying she had to learn to take a joke. After she left, her sister's new husband was upset with his new wife because he felt the joke was completely inappropriate, insensitive, and in poor taste. The whole time I was reading the post, I kept thinking if I was one of the guests at that wedding, I would be tempted to knock the maid of honor. Story 3. Oh my god. I was at my cousin's wedding a couple of years back. Everything's going great. Food's amazing and everyone's having a good time. Then it's time for the best man speech. This guy, let's call him Brad, gets up there looking nervous. Red flag number 1. He starts off okay, talking about how he and the groom have been friends since college. You know, the standard stuff. But then, oh god. He goes, and speaking of college, remember that time we made a pact that if we were both single at 30, we'd marry each other? The entire room went silent. You could hear a pin drop. The bride's face was stone cold, but Brad just kept going. He's laughing, saying stuff like, guess I missed my chance, huh, buddy? And don't worry, my cousin's name. I'm sure he likes you more than me. Probably. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. People were squirming in their seats. The groom looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. And the bride, if looks could terminate, then I would have had to attend the funeral shortly after the wedding. Story 4. At a friend's wedding, the maid of honor gave a speech. My wife and I were friends with the bride. To clarify, the maid of honor met the groom when they were 17 to 18 at a new church he went to. The maid of honor met the bride post-college when they were all 22 to 23-ish. Became best friends. Bride and groom married at about 27. The maid of honor mentioned the bride 3 times in her speech, and the groom a whopping 18 times in her speech, referring to him as my Benny Boo 8 or 9 times and almost always using a possessive when mentioning him. It was painstakingly clear she had a massive crush on the groom. We talked to the bride about it several months later, and apparently they talked to her much more because she was making the groom uncomfortable with how much flirty she was with him after the marriage whenever they would see her. Some 6 years later, neither of them have talked to her for the past 4 years after she confessed she was in love with him while drinking with her church friend group. Fun times. Story 5. I was maid of honor at my sister's wedding and I hadn't prepared a speech. I figured I'd wing. But as the time drew near, I started to get nervous. My dad gave a speech first and he nailed it. People were laughing at his jokes and moved to tears by his anecdotes. When it was my turn, my sister asked if the best man could go first because he was nervous. I said, sure. The best man bombed. He bombed bad. He was tripping over his own words, stuttering, gasping, and almost hyperventilating. It was just barely intelligible, and at one point he looked like he was on the verge of retching. You would think I'd be relieved because anyone who didn't soil themselves would look good after that, but I'm not a monster. The secondhand embarrassment I felt for this guy was painful. Once he was put out of his misery, I took my turn and also bombed, but it was more a regular, what a lame speech sort of bombing. The groom leaned in and whispered, "You're damn lucky Mike messed up as bad as he did. No one will even remember you." He wasn't wrong. Story 6. Intoxicated maid of dishonor disclosed that she'd hat-tricked the bride, slept with the new husband before and the bride started dating, but still, the bride was unaware, the bride's brother and the bride's dad. She started out great, but was too hammered to read her prepared notes and decided to wing it instead. That first dance after dinner was pretty awkward, as the bride's parents were very much married, and during it, everyone in the room silently did the math on her conquests based on pertinent details. I was at a table of people who all kind of disliked the bride, and even we all felt awful for her. It was so bad. The wedding cost more than my current house and was held at a yacht club that revoked the family's membership and morality clause the following day. Story 7. My dad is hilarious and loving, but public speaking isn't his strong suit. At my younger sister's wedding a few years ago, he gave this rambling speech where he described her as a plane that just taxied on the runway forever, and you wondered if it would ever take off. He was trying to say she was a late bloomer, but he made this hand motion of a plane just stuck on the runway. We gave him so much grief for that because he basically told everyone she didn't blossom until she met her husband, who's the life of the party. Fast forward to my wedding a few months ago, I jokingly told him he needed to step up his game after my sister's speech. I was sure he'd put more effort into mine after all the teasing he got. Nope. He told everyone that he thought I was autistic when I was young and ended it by saying, "But I don't think she turned out to be." I spent the rest of my wedding night fake laughing at everyone's autism jokes. Thanks, Dad. Sounds like maybe Dad has a touch of the tism. Story 8. I've never heard someone say something particularly egregious. It's just the length that's the issue. Wedding toasts are supposed to be, well, toasts. It's a couple of lines followed by a sip of your raised champagne glass. To the bride and groom, may their love continue to flourish and bring joy to those around them. May they always remember the reasons they fell in love and never forget the laughter, the tears, and the dance parties that brought them here today. Cheers. That's it. I don't understand how it turned into a 10-minute rambling speech where the best man, maid of honor, father of the bride, and maybe even mother of the groom all describe their relationship in minute detail while everyone stands awkwardly holding their glass of champagne, hoping it would all just end. Just give a quick toast, drink, then get to the festivities. Story 9. I went to my partner's cousin's wedding earlier this month. The father of the groom is the officiant, and he was also a pastor or priest or whatever. Granted, I'm not 100% fluent in Spanish, but I know enough. It started off fine, God has brought us all together to celebrate this love, that sort of thing. But then he went on about how great it was that God created all the land, sea, sky, animals, fish, birds, and more. I kind of lost the plot around that time, but I did recognize that literally every other sentence was glory to God. This went on for a good 10 minutes, as he was screaming his praises. Finally, he remembered it was a wedding, not a sermon, and was like, "Oh yeah, let's move on to the vows." After the vows, he started ranting again, so the bride just took out the rings and did the exchange herself. He didn't even notice. It was something. Story 10. My dad, white dude, married my mom, Filipino, and once they split, he exclusively dated Asian women. It's kind of weird, and I'm usually the first to make yellow fever jokes. The only non-Asian woman he dated was his high school girlfriend. Not too many Asians in Indiana in the 60s, to be fair. My aunt is a huge handful, but a lot of fun. At my dad's wedding to my stepmom, Taiwanese, my aunt, who was blitzed off the open bar by this point, toasted them and said something to the effect of, "Yeah, Papa Yoda kept bringing all these Chinese women around that he was going out with, and Stepmama Yoda is the first one I liked. You picked a good one." While this was happening, my cousin tried to shrink down into her seat, looked at me and mouthed, "Oh my God." Story 11. My cousin's wedding had two bad toasts. First, the maid of honor got up to speak about the bride. She rambled on and on about how she was very popular with so many guys in high school, and she could have taken her pick on men. But my cousin was the one, after so many guys, that managed to settle her down. Next, the mother of the groom stood up and used her speech to issue thinly veiled insults at the bride, at one point mentioning, "She's a diamond in the rough," yada yada, but his love and support will polish her until she shines, or some crazy stuff. It was bonkers. The priest also took 10 minutes in the middle of the ceremony to speak on God's love and how you need to turn on the Jesus faucet and let that love wash over you. Story 12. Mother of the bride, toasting her daughter and son-in-law. Now that those two are hitched, I can finally tell you that Bob and I are finally divorcing. Meet his replacement, John. Same version with her father, which went a bit like that. As Janet said, we're free from the shackles of marriage. And this is my lovely girlfriend, Natalia. Oh, and congratulations to Lucy and Kyle. Hope you don't make the same mistakes we did. Like staying married for the children while having affairs, bringing their side pieces to the wedding as friends and announcing everything during their toasts. It's been a few years. And last I checked, the bride is still in no contact with her birth givers, and they're all Pikachu faces about it. Story 13. Ooh, I have a story where I missed the toast, and that's what made it worse. My sister and I slipped out of my brother's wedding during that time between the ceremony and dinner, where everyone was just waiting around. We'd been waiting for around 2 hours, and nothing was happening. Sister-in-law told us that she'd forgotten to bring food for her baby, who was in the process of weaning, so my sister and I decided to run out, go for a drive to the closest Tesco, pick up some baby food, and come back ASAP. Well, the dinner started in the 15 minutes that we were away, and my brother decided to call us out on not being there during his speech as groom, not realizing that the reason we were missing was because we were getting baby food for his nephew. My sister and I were on a table with the mother of the bride and the sister of the bride, both of whom we had never met, and both of whom were glaring daggers at us the whole dinner because we'd missed the speeches. It was very awkward. My sister and I both tried to start conversations with them, but they wouldn't engage with us at all. Awkward. Story 14. A friend from university was getting married, and they organized it all themselves on quite a modest budget and used their church hall for the reception. It was actually really lovely, and lots of family from both sides as well as a lot of uni friends. The mother of the bride does her speech and gushes about how lovely the groom is and how they haven't lost a daughter so much as gained a son, and other such welcoming words. It was super sweet. Then the mother of the groom steps up and gives her speech. She very much didn't like the bride, who was just super lovely and sweet and everyone liked her. She also clearly was ad-libbing her speech a bit because she was super passive-aggressive the whole speech and tried her own spin on the mother of the bride speech but said, "We haven't lost a son so much as gained our couch back." Turns out the bride would occasionally sleep on the family couch when she would visit with him rather than sleep in the same bed, or even be offered a guest bed or something. All us uni friends were gobsmacked at the awfulness of the speech, and were mouthing, "What the heck?" to each other. Also, it was heartbreaking to see the bride keep smiling and enjoy her happy day while clearly being crushed by such a witch. Story 15. One of the worst weddings I've ever had the misfortune of attending had several terrible speeches. Where do I begin? A microphone was passed around to every table where they made each person say something to the room. It was extremely awkward. They made each table sing for their supper, by having the whole group of assorted strangers go to the middle of the dance floor and sing a song together. All of the elderly folks, both sets of grandparents included, were the last table that got up and got their food last. The brother of the groom was incredibly hammered during his speech and kept saying, "Go Pats," throughout his rambling nonsense. One of the moms basically said to go in the bathroom during the reception to start making grandchildren. The father agreed and doubled down on this. It was so cringy. I couldn't wait to leave. Story 16. I was at an old friend's wedding party recently. They had actually married discreetly like a year before and threw this dinner party later on. I thought it was a little odd and I told my sister. I hope she doesn't feel like she has to host a celebration party, but we didn't think about it. Then came the dinner toasts and it was her friend's brother, her sister, her dad, her whole family just standing up in every other sense they said they would nag on. Like, it is wonderful that they've married. We're so happy to welcome husband into the family. We would have liked it more if we had known, of course. We cringed real hard about that. The brother was especially broody about it. The more we heard, the more we thought, yeah, it makes sense that they're married with minimal people and didn't tell anyone. I wouldn't want those guys toasting at my party either. It was all in all a bit sad. My sister, I think, was the only one who actually asked the bride, "How was it? Were you nervous? What did you wear? What did the kids think?" And she totally lit up and went to get some photos and was so happy to talk about it. Then when her brother came by to crash her mood, we told him to his face that he just gave us a bingo. In our game of bitter bingo. And that was true. My sister and I invented that game about 4 toasts previous. Story 17. Went to the wedding of a good friend from high school about 10 years after we graduated. She was the younger of 2 daughters and was always considered the golden child. Her older sister had not married at the time and had, in fact, hardly dated at all. Her eccentric father got up on stage in a bedazzled Star Wars themed suit and said, "I have two beautiful daughters and we're ready for grandchildren. So, groom, I hope you have strong specimens because we need you to start cranking them out fast." Like, I know it's a given that many newlyweds are intimate on their wedding night, but nearly the entirety of his toast that night was begging his new son-in-law to be intimate to his daughter because he wanted grandchildren, and fast. It was very uncomfortable, but so many people were like, "Ah ha, well, that's just father of the bride for you." Like, I went to church with his family for decades, sat next to this man in choir every Sunday, celebrated birthdays and holidays at their house, considered his daughter much like a sister growing up. Never expected him to speak that way about having grandkids, especially as his toast on her wedding day. It was weird. Story 18. My husband's cousin asked my father-in-law after our ceremony if she could make a speech. My husband and I in unison said, "Hell no." Father-in-law said, "Okay, no problem." We thought it ended there. Well, husband's cousin is not my fave, untrustworthy and a self-centered drama queen, but she's his family. I can only take her in small doses. After maid of honor and best man make their speeches, she stumbles onto the microphone and makes the worst speech in history, slurring throughout the entire speech, not making any sense. "Your love is like a flower." Couldn't find her words and she made a complete fool out of herself. As she was speaking, I was gripping, actually more digging my fingers with a tightest grip, on my husband, completely in shock as this hot mess of a cousin made no sense and embarrassed the entire family, and honestly, all of our guests were embarrassed for her. I glanced over at my amazing mother-in-law. She was absolutely mortified. Then my boss queen of a sister-in-law, who, by the way, does not do well in crowds or speaking in public, stormed up and yanked the mic out of the cousin's hand and made the most beautiful impromptu speech. She saved the day. I'll forever be grateful to my wonderful sister-in-law because I know she had no intention of making a speech and how she's very uncomfortable and anxious in large crowds. Her guests constantly comment about how amazing and fun our wedding and venue was, but everyone asked who the hell the hot mess making the speech was and how embarrassed they were for her. So many of her guests got up and walked outside during her speech. The icing on the cake was finding out after the fact that the hot mess cousin was offering everyone, including my coworkers, bosses, and family members that she'd never met until that day, substances while in the lines for the restroom and trying to squat in other people's hotel rooms. Needless to say, we've been married a little over a year and we no longer have any contact with her. Our life together is so much more peaceful without her in our lives. Our guests are still talking about her to this day. It was wild. Story 19. By far the worst wedding speech I've ever seen was from the father of the groom. He spent quite a bit of time expressing how he was generally disappointed that his son had become an artist instead of entering a more lucrative profession like his older brother. He also rambled on for a while about how he had always thought his son was not straight and was frankly a little surprised that he was marrying a woman that day. At another point during the speech, he mortified the bride, who was sitting right up front and really couldn't move, by saying that she appeared to be quite a good woman and that he hoped she started bearing children for the family soon. The whole speech was really quite something. The mother of the groom tried several times to get him to wrap things up, once trying to physically remove the microphone from his hands, but he just kept going. A rumor circulated among the guests that a similarly horrifying speech at the older son's wedding a few years back had almost resulted in a divorce. Story 20. My stepdad decided to tell everyone how I insisted on sleeping on the floor by his and my mother's bed for some time after she and I moved in with him. I was about 12 at the time, and only met him literally 4 times prior to moving in. He also mentioned how I would cry and get upset if I couldn't. He thought this was funny. My mother also passed away a month after I got engaged. Diagnosed stage 4 6 days after engagement, and I was primary caregiver, and a little over a year before I got married. Not having her there was so hard. This behavior for me was due to anxiety and her constantly leaving my sister and I for days at a time. Her ex-boyfriends were quite mistreating towards all of us. I wanted to be close to her, but not in bed with her, at least for a little while after we moved in. He knew about some of the things, but not at all. I wanted to cry and curl up in a ball under the table. This speech was also included on my wedding video. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 21. Best man said he didn't really like the groom at first because he was boring. But then when they lived together in college, the groom bought food and did stuff for him, so he thought, okay, he's okay. Told a story about a groom soiling his pants with no anecdote or tie back to his speech, their friendship, or the wedding. Said he didn't bother to get to know the bride. His groom had been dating for years until one day, while in the mountains, the bride wanted to go to a spin class and the groom said he wouldn't drive her because he wanted to play Call of Duty. So he drove the bride since it was icy and she didn't want to drive. This story was long, majority of speech, and basic gist is they were 5 minutes late to spin class. Not allowed in, drove to another gym and worked out together. He likes working out, so yeah, he thought she was cool then. There were roughly 30,000 uses of I or me in the speech. Story 22. Bride, 29, and groom, 31, were engaged for 2 years. They picked out the day right away. Bride wanted to get married on the anniversary of their first date, and in 2 years' time, it would have fallen on a Saturday. So all as key speakers, I was the best man, knew we had 2 years to think of something to say. The ceremony was very short, as the bride and groom wanted room for toasts and best wishes. There were 6 planned toasts, after which a microphone was put up front for folks to share best wishes and stories. It was a really cool idea, and all night long, lots of guests shared funny and touching stories. The first 4 toasts all went well. Our father of the bride, mother of the bride, maid of honor, best man, all were nice, fairly standard wedding toasts. Then we got to the mother of the groom. She's a smart, well-educated woman, lawyer. She takes the microphone and says, "Well, I don't know what to say," and passes the microphone to father of the groom. Father of the groom, I don't know what to say either. Congratulations, I guess." Bride's eyes welled up in disappointment. Groom glares at his parents and whispers, "You had 2 whole years." Story 23. Might be the speech I held at my own wedding. I had come down with sickness but recovered just in time, super stressed and still getting fever flashes, which the drinks did not help with. My short temper regarding technology not working and my stuttering only worked to fuel the awful show. The microphone would cut out every other word and I could not get a good flow going. Normally, I'm quite a good public speaker, but all of these things combined sent me into a bit of a rage. The basic of the speech was good, but my Aussie friends told me that they've never heard someone say foul words that many times in a wedding speech before. Everyone had a good time, though. Still, my worst speech. Later, I learned that one of the bridesmaids' girlfriends was talking awful stuff to me to random people after the wedding, which led me to be known as the guy who was too stunned to speak at his own wedding. The fact that she passed out 30 minutes after I was done was, however, not important. Story 24. In the dozens of weddings I've been to or in since college, I've never heard anything too jaw-droppingly bad. However, only one maid of honor speech has been great. The rest have been solidly below average from a public speaking or holding attention of the crowd lens. Maid of honor speeches, in my listening experience, have too many in-jokes from where the girls were 18 to 14. Had to be there jokes. And not enough evidence or proof to validate why they randomly start crying halfway through. No, your sister's not the best listener ever. Give me something real. Best man speeches range from horrendously useless to solidly above average depending on content. We've moved past the era of being raunchy and gross in a best man speech. Get that out of there. Good best man speeches give men the unique opportunity to show emotions with legitimate reasoning as to why the groom is a good guy, and include jokes that people outside of the friend group understand. Parent speeches are often the best, if the parent has any public speaking skills, because they have the ability to apply hindsight and the emotion that comes with it in the way that best men or maid of honor often cannot. When X was 14, I saw this trait in them for the first time. That is why they have been so successful. Thank you for listening to my TED Talk. Story 25. The bride's dad, I know we can all agree this is a little soon, and so on for minutes. Honestly, the entire night had this energy. The couple had barely known each other for 2 years. The bride was big into Instagram and no one really was smiling out of frame, but once they were snapping pictures or taking videos, these obviously fake smiles were coming out before being pocketed again. Outside of the bride and groom, who were both stressed about putting on the wedding, the bride's grandmother was sneering at people and was making them leave for wearing jeans, even though the bride said no dress code because the ceremony and reception were at a literal farm with goats. My wife and I missed the ceremony because we had to go to Walmart to buy dress pants since we drove a solid 45 minutes to attend. A good friend who only wore khakis said the ceremony was as cringy and insincere as everything we didn't miss. And it turns out the grandma was intentionally acting rogue for the bride's wishes because she personally felt as though her husband should be the only one allowed to wear jeans. The food was decent, though. Story 26. It feels like it should be a tie, but to pick one. Mother of groom gave a whole speech for 20 minutes, complete with gifts, if you can call them that, for the bride whom she mentioned exactly once. I'm not even sure she actually mentioned her son at all that much either. The father was also supposed to be speaking and looked incredibly uncomfortable. Icing on the cake was the statement, "I can never find my son and neither can his wife." Which I wish I had context to give you because I wish she had given any context at all. It went from he was always such a sweet kid beforehand to he's so smart immediately after. Completely out of the blue, and her son was in her line of sight at the sweetheart table, so. eh. Because of the length, the couple had to cut a whole dance set from the wedding so that there was literally only one dance set the entire night. Swore off speeches at all for my wedding because of this woman. Story 27. A very small wedding and speeches were informal. The best man spoke. Maid of honor spoke, and then they opened up to the floor. Father of the groom had said he wasn't going to speak, but then the uncle of the groom stood up and spent 15 minutes talking about his wife. How amazing the aunt was, how fantastic their 40 years of marriage had been. She was beautiful now as the day they were married, etc. He mentioned the groom once, didn't mention the bride. It was all about the groom's aunt and her specialness. Hearing this 15 minutes of blatant lies from his brother, the father of groom stood up and gave a 15-minute speech on his wife, rebutted all the points the uncle made, gushed repeatedly about the amazing qualities of his wife, was the groom's stepmother, and then said that the stepmother was the best thing to have happened to the entire family in the last 10,000 years. Uncle was upset and said no, his wife was the best thing to have happened in the past 10,000 years. At no point did the father of groom mention the bridal party at all. They continued to debate this for another 5 minutes before both wives told them to shut up. It was so awkward. Story 28. I used to be a conservative Christian, and the girl, let's call her B, who I taught scriptures class with was getting married. B's dad was even more conservative than we were, and he was known for being very outspoken about his opinions and saying things that weren't completely politically correct. The groom's dad made a lovely speech about how they haven't lost a son but gained a daughter and how excited they are that she was marrying into the family. Now, my friend's dad stood up and in a very serious, deep voice began to talk about how B and the groom were going to see each other for the first time. He just kept going. His whole speech was just about them losing their cards to each other. I could hear a lot of people cringing around me, and after a while, some people, for some reason, began to clap. I don't think B was too fazed, but I could see the groom's face and he was really embarrassed. Story 29. The worst one I was at was the groom's brother saying basically this, but in a storytelling format. The bride was, and still is, an awful person, and he rushed into an engagement with her. When he told his dad and brother, they were upset because they hadn't been together long and because she was terrible, so they kept asking if he was sure and thought he was making a mistake. Anyway, for the brother's speech, he recounted the moment they were told about the engagement, but leaving the reasons why they were worried a bit vague. He turned that into a joke at the groom's expense, and everyone sat bug-eyed because we all hated her, and here was his brother saying exactly what we'd been thinking since they got engaged. He finally closes with a bit about how the groom's got to be sure about this because divorce is lengthy and expensive. Cheers. Story 30. I was part of the catering crew at a wedding. The ceremony was on the beach and the reception was in the resort. When the bride and groom came in, the entire waitstaff kind of dropped their jaws because these kids couldn't have been more than the right age. When the father of the bride made a speech, he went on and on about how his daughter always gets what she wants. She had this wedding at the beach and they were going to have a second wedding back home in Texas. Then he goes on to describe every extracurricular activity she ever did and quit. Cheerleader for 6 months, then she took up dancing for a few weeks. She got really into sewing for a while but quit when she joined Girl Scouts. When she left to chase her dream of being a dog walker. Basically, his whole speech was calling her a spoiled brat who doesn't stick with anything. So the groom probably felt awesome about that. Story 31. It's not what was said, it was what was omitted. I went to the wedding of a couple who, let's just say, are banking on the opposites attract thing, and don't have much in common. When they announced their engagement with, "I have news," most everyone thought they were breaking up. So not the best match, and I think many people would agree. That said, if you have nothing nice to say, decline making a speech. None of the speeches mentioned them as a couple at all. The groom's brother said, "Bride, I don't know you that well, but you seem nice enough." The father of the groom said, "When we met bride, we thought, she will do, since groom's past girlfriends weren't the best." The father of the bride, newly divorced, likened marriage to World War I's trenches. The sister of the bride had little more to say than, "Sister, if you're happy, then we're happy for you," in a kind of resigned kind of way.
I didn't make a speech because, frankly, I didn't really have many positive things to say about the couple. So, I took Thumper's advice and said nothing at all. Speeches are not compulsory, and should follow a certain script to avoid this type of thing. Story 32. My uncle played in a wedding polka band, very popular where I'm from, in the 80s and 90s. He played at hundreds of weddings and has a few choice stories. A lovely interracial couple was getting married. While they were fine with it, each of their respective families definitely weren't. During the speeches, terms were thrown about from both sides. The room, which was literally divided into two halves, white on one side, black on the other, began hurling chairs, tables, drinks, food, and anything else not nailed down across the room. Wedding celebration was called off and the bride and groom were hit with a massive damage bill. An uncle from the groom's side of the family was found in the bathroom. Police were called and they worked to keep the terrible situation as low-key as it could possibly be. For the most part, it worked, with the vast majority of the people from each side unaware and free to keep enjoying the wedding for a while. That all changed when the bride's grandfather took the mic out of the best man's hands and screamed. The grimy details of the event swept the room, and not 3 hours later, a brawl erupted. The best man met the bride in the bathroom during the rehearsal dinner the night before, apparently for the first time. Come wedding day, he got hammered and decided to use his speech to confess his love for the bride, before casually telling her she should get tested. Wedding celebration was canceled on the spot and they got a divorce a short time later. Story 33. At my brother Dave's wedding, we passed a mic around for everyone to say something nice to the bride and the groom. My brother Trevor is a giant teddy bear of a man, so naturally he pretty much just sobbed into the mic and passed it on to the rest of my family. My sister and parents gave some touching remarks. Being the youngest, I was the last to receive the mic. Dave and I have a relationship that is based on the foundation of banter. Basically, when we were younger, we would purposely be sarcastic schmucks to each other. The alternative was just being actual schmucks to each other. So the moment the mic touched my hand, I was committed to being a schmuck at his own wedding. It felt fitting, and I just wanted to brighten the mood. It went over great. Everyone laughed, and I was able to signal, hopefully, that I was proud and happy for him. I also burned my sister-in-law for good measure. My little speech wasn't the issue. For whatever reason, the rest of the attendees decided to follow my example and decided to burn my brother. There is a big difference between being burned by your sister, who you have a good relationship with, and being burned by your aunt who you secretly hate. Or worse yet, having your wife's second cousin, who you have never spoken to, tell you that your wife could do better in a joking manner. It was just a goddamn mess, and it was all my fault. Dave went from crying to laughing to completely stone-faced. If I ever get married, I know he's going to find a way to get back at me. Looks like the wedding turned into a roast session. The only thing getting toasted was Dave's ego. Story 34. I gave a pretty awful speech at a wedding a few years ago. It was my best friend's wedding, and I was a stand-in for his brother, who was supposed to be the best man, but backed out the day before. My best friend told me a speech wouldn't be needed, but I made one anyway. One thing you'd have to know, my best friend and his now wife fight nonstop. All the damn time, or at least they used to. I'm not around them as much to know if it's gone better. I didn't think their wedding was a good idea, but 5 to 6 years and 2 kids and they're still together, so maybe I was wrong. About a week before their wedding, we were all out at a bar and she was on her phone. She used to smoke and had a pack of cigarettes on the table. She got up and walked off to talk in privacy with her parents about something, and my buddy puts all 20 cigarettes in his mouth, lights them all, starts gagging, and stuffs them back into the box. She sits back down, still on the phone, and grabs a cigarette. Noticing it's been burned, she throws it down and grabs another one, and then another. She launches into this tirade and immediately slaps him, and instantly he slaps her back. They start wrestling in the bar, and next thing I know, they're passionately making out. My other buddy is filming this whole thing, which he put on YouTube, and I'm just shocked by what I'm watching. So my idea for this speech was to mention how much they fight, but then also mention how well they forgive each other and are able to let bygones be bygones, and how we could all learn something by their forgiving natures. The reception is in full swing, I'm hammered, and the crowd starts yelling for a speech. So I stumble up there and start with telling them how much my buddy and his wife fight. Then I mention their argument the previous weekend, how she slapped him, he slapped her back, and they started making out. I also mentioned that the video is on YouTube, if anyone is interested in seeing it, and all of a sudden, I can feel my skin boiling. It's the wife, shooting lasers into my body. At this point, I realize I'm probably too hammered to regale everyone with what I was wanting to say, so I sort of half-tiptoed my way out of it, and handed the mic to the maid of honor. Yeah, that was awful. The maid of honor, bride's sister, came up afterward, Told me that was the best speech ever, so I guess it wasn't all bad. Story 35. At my sister's wedding, my parents didn't like the groom. Still don't, but hey, it's been 10 years at this point. My father had been drinking pretty much since the moment he woke up that day, got his hands on the mic. I sat with a watch, having been told to signal at 2 minutes for all speakers, but was ignored as the speech from hell started and went nearly 8 minutes. She was told how hard marriage was, how she should have picked a stronger partner, how she needed to be supported, and how everything up to this point didn't matter. Life was going to be terrible. Then we were all told how wonderful our mother is as a wife and how we should emulate her in every way, and then we too will have a perfect family. My sister was embarrassed and my father could barely stand, and her new husband sat staring at the ground the whole time. My boyfriend had proposed to me a week prior to this and stared at me in horror. I will never forget the faces of her family as he handed the mic off. My grandfather took the mic and said something along the lines of, "You did this. You deal with it until you both pass away." For my wedding 3 years later, my sister watched from a doorway as I was told that happiness isn't everything, and that I was going to be a mother. I was pregnant at the time. So playtime was over and that my husband better grow up and be a man. Then I got the speech about emulating my mother. Nearly the same as before. We both just nodded and tried not to look mortified. Dad only spoke for a moment before the best man stepped up and eased the tension. I get that my dad loves us and clearly has an obsession with my mother, but neither my sister or me are particularly close to her. It was so bizarre, and still is the one thing we both cringe over. Story 36. I was maid of honor at my sister's wedding when I was 16. Had no earthly clue I was supposed to give a speech until we were literally on the way to the ceremony. Cue the oh no moment. I looked up some sappy quotes online about love and marriage, tried to commit one to memory. I gave my speech after the best man, so I kind of had a template. He talked about how he felt when his brother came home with my sister. I think, okay, I can do this. I like my new brother-in-law. Say something nice about him. No one can say I didn't try. I was nervous, unprepared, and had never given a speech before in my life. In a rare form, I stumbled over my words and eventually blurted out, "When my sister brought brother-in-law home to meet her family for the first time, I was surprised that he wasn't anything like what I had expected." Oh no, that came out wrong. Some gasps and murmurs. My sister laughed exaggeratedly to try to cover up her shock and anger. What I was trying to say was that brother-in-law was special and uniquely perfect for my sister. What I actually said implied it was lacking in nearly every capacity. I laughed nervously and tried to cover it up with an, "Kidding." Kidding? Finally, just to put myself out of my misery, I told the one quote I actually memorized from that morning. "I hope your marriage is filled with lying, cheating, and stealing. I hope you two lie next to each other every night. I hope you two cheat for many long years. And I hope you steal each other's hearts every day for the rest of your lives." The audience awes. My sister smiles. I hand her my mic as fast as humanly possible and hide behind them as they cut the cake. I still lie awake sometimes, hurting myself, and it was years ago. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.